Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rob Theriault, an immersive learning research network production for iLRN 2023, our 9th annual international conference here on the online campus, sponsored by Virbela, our major sponsor for the iLRN 2023 conference. And it's my pleasure. My name is Jonathon Richter. I'm the CEO of iLRN. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Rob Theriault tonight. Rob Theriault is the Immersive Technology Manager for Georgian College in Ontario, Canada. Prior to taking this position, Rob was a 35-year veteran paramedic and former critical care flight paramedic. Rob also taught paramedics for almost as many years. After introducing virtual reality into the paramedic program at Georgian and helping to create a VR hub in the library, Rob was asked to lead the exploration and integration of VR for Georgian's 7 campuses. Since the start of 2020, Georgian's launched over 20 virtual reality pilots in program areas such as Indigenous language learning, veterinary technician, biotech, paramedic, nursing, power engineering, events management, maritime ship navigation, and others. In 2022, Rob received the Virtual World Society's prestigious Nextant Educator Prize, which honors those individuals who dedicate their work to enhancing the educational XR experience for others. Rob is also the co-chair for the Champions in Higher Education and XR programs for iLRN. Ladies and gentlemen, Rob Theriault. Rob?
Hi, everybody. Thanks very much. Just to clarify, I am not a PhD, so I'm not sure how that slipped into my bio, but but I'm not there and have no plans to be anytime soon. But thanks very much for coming to this session. And it's funny, you know, we're in an immersive environment, and I'm a strong critic of using virtual reality in a way that you would stand on a stage and give a lecture to an audience of people who are sitting in an amphitheater. But it is what it is. You know, I think the power of virtual, mixed, and augmented reality is to go places that you wouldn't normally be able to go, and not just a classroom. So, but here we are, and such is life. And this is a talk that's a little different from asynchronous and synchronous, which is easy enough when most of your students are in the same time zone or close to the same time zone. I appreciate that it's very difficult when you've got students from all over the world. But in any case, I started experimenting with synchronized online learning in 1999, and then started using it, using a platform in 2005. And by 2015, there were maybe 10 of us at my college who were doing a combination of asynchronous and synchronous online learning, which is not really anywhere remotely near a threshold level of interest. Fast forward to 2020 and the pandemic, and suddenly every school in every country on the entire planet is doing synchronous online learning. So it took a pandemic to take that particular educational technology to beyond a threshold level of interest. Think about podcasting. I started podcasting in 2005, and I did it because as a learner myself, I would attend some really amazing lectures, and I could never keep up with the information. And I always thought I would have loved to have had a recording of that lecture for future reference. And so I thought, you know, for my students, I would start recording my classes, which I did around 2005. And to this day, most of my classes are still on Spotify. I started originally on iTunes University, and then moved to Spotify and a few other different podcast areas. And, you know, for a simple technology, it was wildly popular with my students. Students often said that they would listen to the podcast after class, and they would come to me and say, you know, Rob, I thought I understood this concept, but when I listened to your podcast, I realized I really didn't have a good understanding, and now it's much more clear to me. And oddly enough, as simple a technology as podcasting is, it was one of the most popular, one of the most powerful of any of the educational technologies that I'd ever used in the class. And to be clear, I'm not enamored with the shiny things. I'm a skeptic, and one of the reasons why I did my master's in educational technology was because I wanted to sort of solidify that skepticism and look at technology from an evidence-based perspective and from an objective perspective to really start to explore technologies that I feel or felt would be would enhance learning. And so that's been my approach. And in what was it, around 2017, I discovered virtual reality, and we adopted virtual reality into our paramedic program, where the students got to practice something called mass casualty incident triage, and that meant that in virtual reality, they were in a scenario where a bus had driven through a hotel lobby and crashed into it and injured some people, and they had to triage those people and sort them out according to who are the walking wounded and who need to be transported immediately. And this was before Jeremy Bailenson book, Experience on Demand, where he talked about the DICE principle. What can virtual reality do that would otherwise in the analog world be dangerous, impossible, counterproductive, or expensive? And I was thinking at the time that we did mock disasters once every couple of years in our paramedic program, and that was a huge amount of work organizing such events, because we had to find volunteer students and put makeup on them to make them look injured, conceive of some sort of mass casualty incident, prepare the students for the exercise, and we had to contact police, fire, and paramedic dispatch to ensure they were aware that we were doing a mock exercise on the school grounds, so that when people saw students lying on the ground property, they would, when they called 911, the dispatch centers would know that this was just a mock disaster, not a real disaster. And the thing about doing mass casualty incident triage in virtual reality is that you could conceivably run multiple mass casualty incidents and actually sort of scaffold the learning in such a way that students go to relatively small incidents and then work their way up so they're better prepared when they get in the field. So it's one of those low frequency, extremely high risk type of calls that just made a lot of sense to be in virtual reality. So that led to a conversation with our senior leadership team, who wanted to know where I thought virtual reality was going as an educational tool. And I had a really good conversation with them for an hour, but after that, I really thought I'd end up just going back to my little paramedic lab and I'd never hear back from them. But I tried to make the pitch with them that virtual reality in particular, out of the XRs, was particularly compelling as an educational technology tool, in the sense that it's the only tool that I'm aware of where students can learn in the cognitive, psychomotor, and affective domains, get experiential learning in the theory portion of their education, and to better prepare them for the lab portion and the field portion, no matter what the program that they're in. And I'm at a community college, so all of the programs we run, most of the programs we run have are applied types of professions. And to my surprise, a week after that conversation, they called me up and they said, we'd like to create this position. We'd like you to help write up the description for us, and we'd like you to apply for it. So I did, and that was 3 years ago. So at the age of 60, I turned from paramedic educator and field paramedic to immersive technology manager, and then it went from there. So this conversation is going to be kind of a synopsis of the things, the approach that I've taken, and what's been successful for us so far. So first and foremost, I want to say that as Jonathon mentioned in the beginning, I'm the co-chair along with Dr. Stephanie Justice of Champions in Higher Education for XR. And we are an advocacy group under the Immersive Learning Research Network, and our role is to help educators who are interested in XR come together, learn from each other, do some networking, talk about how we make things happen, and then advocating for immersive learning in XR to enterprise, to management, etc. And I'll touch a little bit at the end on this whole concept of collaboration. So I'm hoping if you're not already a member of CHEX, that you'll join. It's you can find it on the iLRN website, and we hold events on a fairly regular basis. So let me first talk about networking. So Paulo Coelho once said that sometimes you have to travel a long way to find what is near. And I found this on my personal journey or experience with educational technology. Oftentimes you'll got an idea, you'll look for something, and you look and look and look, and then you meet another educator who says, you know, Rob, why don't you do this? And you think to yourself, yeah, why didn't I think of this months ago? So I think it's really important to network and develop your own peer learning network. And I do that through social media. So I look for people smarter than me on LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook, and I look for groups, and I subscribe to Google News. So I'm getting feeds all the time in my mail, and I'm constantly learning from people in other schools and other experiences. And so I think that's an important part of the networking piece. So, and then in terms of making it happen, Georgian, we took a bit of a different approach. A lot of schools harness the talents of their XR development students to create something. Perhaps a professor approaches them and asks them to create something particular in mind for the program that they teach, and they develop it, they beta test it, maybe they do some research around it, perhaps it gets integrated into curriculum, or it's situated in an XR lab and students cycle through that, and that's a great approach. Unfortunately, we don't have that luxury where I teach, because we don't have an XR program. We have a 2-year gaming program. Now, they did go through curriculum renewal. They're going to be doing some XR development starting this fall. So I'm guessing that students might be able to do some work with us in about 2 to 3 years' time when they get close to their capstone projects at the end of their program. So one way of deploying XR is through in-house development. And the other, which is the approach that we've taken, is to look for compelling off-the-shelf products. And then what I do is I'll get a trial version of something I think looks really interesting. I'll approach some faculty who I know to be early adopters, innovators, and I'll let them try the experience, have a conversation with them, and see what they think about doing a pilot around that particular experience. And, you know, of course, we talk about Jeremy Balance's, is it dangerous, impossible, counterproductive, or expensive? I always also think about, you know, would it otherwise in the analog world be difficult, impractical, inappropriate? When I say inappropriate, you know, I'm thinking of things like it would be inappropriate to take police, fire, or paramedic students to a crime scene or a car crash scene. You can do it in virtual reality, and you can take your time looking at the crime scene. You know, in the case of these students, it's around looking at evidence and collecting evidence. In the case of paramedics and firefighters, it's around preserving the crime scene when you're going to resuscitate someone, and not stepping in, you know, on top of other people's footprints, or, you know, interfering with blood spatters on the wall. So that's the approach that we've taken. We've in 3 years, we've amassed about 400 VR headsets. We've integrated virtual reality into 4 programs. I'll talk about those briefly. And we've piloted VR in about 20 other programs. And I say VR because that's been our main focus. I found a couple of fairly compelling augmented reality applications, but we haven't gone the AR route to any significant extent just yet. So, and I want to first of all acknowledge that, you know, innovation typically happens at the teacher level, at the faculty level. And so when I spoke to our senior leadership team about this new role that I have and how I wanted to approach it, I said I wanted to have conversations with frontline faculty. Because if you teach in the college or university sector, you know that you're unlikely to be successful trying to get teachers to adopt a technology from the top down. Teachers don't like to be, they're intrinsically motivated, but not extrinsically motivated. So they don't like to be told you're going to use this technology. They like to, come up with the idea and adopt it from the ground level. So my approach has been to speak with faculty directly. And so, as I say, I find something compelling. One of the first ones I found was virtual reality anatomy. And I basically just stepped out of my office every time I saw an anatomy teacher walk by and say, hey, do you want to try this virtual reality experience? It's pretty cool. And I don't have pictures in the slide deck, but I have all sorts of pictures of faculty in the hallways trying out virtual reality anatomy, and just the expression on their faces and the reactions of those people is incredible. And we run a lot of VR events right now where we showcase virtual reality anatomy and 3D painting, and the reactions are always amazing. And then what I'll do sometimes, like on this particular slide behind me, this is a case where, teacher wanted to know about interior designing virtual reality. We found this free application that was kind of cool, and so we showed it to her, and then we went to her class and got her class to try this this application. And funny enough, in the first class we did the demo in, two of the students went straight to Best Buy and purchased VR headsets and got the apps. So it's pretty fun to see the kinds of reactions that you get with students. The first program, and this speaks to this idea of early adopters and innovators in school. The first program to adopt virtual reality at Georgian College was our architectural technology program, and they've been using it since 2018. And interestingly enough, I didn't even know they were doing virtual reality until I was about 2 months into my new role as immersive technology manager, and then I discovered that. Oops, hang on a second here. I want to go back a slide. Oh, there we go. And which is a testament to how teachers will often innovate, but then not tell anyone about what they're doing, except in their immediate sort of program area. And so it often goes unnoticed, and there was no media attention given to what he was doing, and what he was doing was quite brilliant. His students were designing buildings in 2D and then going into a 3D environment and seeing things to scale. And that perspective, that 3D spatial perspective, is very powerful. When you step into your own house that you've designed, suddenly you realize, this ceiling really should be elevated 2 feet, and this hallway you could drive a truck through. We should narrow it a little bit. And this spiral staircase just looks wrong here, in 3D. And so where can we move it to that'll look good, but also not affect the structural integrity of the building? And you can do that in virtual reality. But one of the most interesting use cases of virtual reality for architecture that I heard was at a presentation actually in AltSpace VR, where an architectural firm spoke and described how they had been contracted to design and build a children's hospital. And what they did was they shrunk their avatars down to the size of a 5-year-old so they could see the design from a child's perspective. And I thought that was just so brilliant and inspirational. I thought that was really incredible. The first pilot that we actually did was with Indigenous Studies at our program, at our school rather. And this was also based on an event that I attended. I was in AltSpace VR, and there's a guy by the name of Michael McDonald. Some of you may know him. He was doing a language event in AltSpace VR, and it was called something like Conversational French in a French Cafe. And we were in a French cafe, and I thought, this makes sense, right? Conversational French in a French cafe, actually in a French cafe. And people in avatar forms, just like you and me, they were going up to the counter and they were ordering coffee and tea and other things, and they were picking up coffee cups, and they were doing their best to speak in French. And I thought, this makes sense. So I approached a lady by the name of Michelle O'Brien, who's a coordinator of our Indigenous Studies program. And I knew that they had 4 language courses: language in the home, language in the workplace, home, workplace, natural environment, and community. And I said to her, what do you think of the idea of having your students go into virtual reality to get, some context-based learning? So I said, I can build you a house in AltSpace VR, because they had digital assets and templates there. And we could go in there with the students and see what you think, see what your teacher thinks, see what the students think. And she was a little skeptical, but I love what she said. She said, Rob, it's not about me, it's about the students. And so we went into VR, and the teacher who was teaching languages loved it. So we brought the students into VR, and then we ended up lending headsets out to the students. It was a small cohort of students, only 15 students, so it made sense from a pilot perspective. And the students took the headsets home. And about 2 months later, the pandemic hit, and it was perfect because they had headsets. And the teacher and the students have been meeting every Thursday for about 30 minutes for the last almost 3 years now. And the other thing that was really interesting, this is language in the home, and there's a medicine wheel in the backyard. You can see people there, and you can't see her avatar particularly well, but in the white area of that medicine wheel is Ernestine Baldwin. She's the elder in the Indigenous community. She's considered the knowledge keeper, and interesting lady. I'll go to the next slide here, and I think there's a video that'll play. She used to come to the school once a month and talk with the students after class, have a conversation with them, do prayer. And when the pandemic hit, they asked her if she would be willing to come into virtual reality. And she was 80 years old. She'd never used a computer before. And she said, sure. So they gave her a laptop computer, and they showed her how to access virtual reality. And she said, well, what about one of those headsets? Could I wear one of those? And they said, sure. So they gave her a headset. And now she has avatars in 3 different platforms, and she comes in every single week, and she meets with students, she does prayer, she has conversations with them, and they were so inspired by her. And if you look at this video, that when they built the community, they named the school after her, and you can see that just behind the bus. So incredible story, and this lady is absolutely wonderful. So I'll just talk about some of these other programs where we've integrated VR into the curriculum, because the other ones we're piloting right now. But let me just see if I can advance to the next slide here. There we go. Okay. So we have at our Owen Sound campus, we have one of the world's largest maritime ship navigation simulators. It's this big deck with a wraparound video, and students come from all over the world. These are students who are apprentices on ships. They learn how to pilot the tanker ships and the cruise ships, and they come to our Owen Sound campus and do the final 4 to 8 weeks of their training on this simulator with ship captains who teach for us. And one of our ship captains who actually teaches remotely, he teaches from Seattle. He came up with the idea after a conversation he and I had around using virtual reality for maritime ship navigation, because there's some students who couldn't come to Canada. So we purchased a bunch of headsets, and this May they started sending out headsets and computers to the shipping companies, and the shipping companies will set these up, and students will meet with our instructors from a distance. I'll just tell you, when we demoed this application at our Owen Sound campus, there were 3 ship captains there. The lead instructor, said to me, Rob, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I'm not sure this is such a great idea. I think, I'm not into the gaming thing. And I said, well, look, I don't know this virtual reality application, and I don't know anything about ship navigation. So this may be okay, or it may be no good at all. But, give it a try, see what you think. And he tried it, and in VR, he met with this other ship captain from Seattle, and they walked around the deck, and they did things with their hands, adjusted gauges and looked at radar, and were navigating the ship. And I would say about 3 or 4 times during the experience, he dropped the F-bomb. And when he came out of the headset, he said, Rob, you know what? I got to say, this is not at all what I expected. And now he's the biggest supporter of the VR experience. So we're going to be not just sending headsets out to students around the world, but we're also going to be using reality to supplement the learning for maritime ship navigation, because we get a lot of applicants from all over to do this sort of thing. And the fourth area where we've integrated or will be integrating virtual reality into curriculum is in our fine arts program. They went through curriculum renewal. They've created a course starting this fall called Virtual Reality Art. And it's a mix of 3D painting and sculpting, but also augmented reality for those students who don't tolerate virtual reality. They can do augmented reality using a tablet or a phone. And so we've, as I mentioned, we've piloted programs in a lot of different areas, including nursing, paramedic, advanced care paramedic, acupuncture, fitness and health promotion, events management, tourism, power engineering, and interior design, and a whole host of other programs. And where it finally, sits, we'll just have to see as time goes on. The other thing we've been doing is hosting a number of events, some small events, some large events. And whenever we do events, I try to get members of the senior leadership team who have not done VR yet to try it, because that's where you get the buy-in. That's where you get a true understanding. On the picture on your right is a photo of our vice president academic who is trying virtual reality for the first time, and she's completely sold on it now. So making it happen is quite important. And the next part, I think, is equally important in these early days. As an educator, I think it's important to start exploring virtual, mixed, and augmented reality now, while it's still fairly nascent from an educational perspective, so that we can start having conversations with companies and advocating for things like hardware that's more education friendly, software that has good instructional design. And I'll give you some examples. So we have one of our veterinary technician program, they piloted animal dissection, and this went really quite well because the students can dissect a number of different animals, and they can dissect them as many times as they like. And the instructional design in this program is really, really quite good, and it takes them through step by step, and then they do it themselves, and it's a good experience. And dissection of animals in the veterinary program, real animals would be important, but in a veterinary technician program, not as important. And in VR, you can dissect any animals numerous times. You can well imagine it's difficult to find 60 dead cats dissect in real life, or even 30 dead cats between two students apiece. But you can do these things in virtual reality. From an advocating standpoint, the only shortcoming of this particular program is it doesn't come with analytics. So there's no way of the student or teacher to receive feedback on what the student did, the sequence in which they did it. Did they identify organs appropriately? Did they do the dissection in the appropriate steps? And so that makes it difficult to use, except as a supplement, because there's no way to use it for summative evaluation. And I can tell you, and I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but students will not do VR, no matter how novel it is, unless they're in VR with their teacher, or unless it's going to have points attached to it. Come to university and college intrinsically motivated, but once they get there, they are extrinsically motivated. If it's not worth marks, they're too overwhelmed with the workload to do anything that's not worth marks. Great program, but no analytics. But you can talk to companies, and they'll change things for you. They'll add analytics. They'll do things. This is another program that's really amazing. It was created by the German government. It's wind turbine maintenance. And a wind turbine maintenance course at college is about a one-year program. And the first semester is mostly, well, pretty much all theory with very little hands-on. And the second semester, they go out in the field and actually get into wind turbines. But with VR, they can get into wind turbines right away in the first week, and they can familiarize themselves with the layout, with all the equipment. They can do troubleshooting and everything. Now, this particular program is actually free, and it's a great program, except that the instructional design is a little weak in the sense that it's one program that'll take you almost an hour and a half to get through. And for starters, that's more time than anyone should spend in a headset at one time, unless you want to have trauma to your face from the pressure on there. And secondly, you quickly exceed your cognitive load within about the first 10 minutes. So it needs to be broken up into chunks, make it digestible for students. And there's no evaluation piece. So great program, great graphics, but lacking in instructional design. And what I found, I mentioned early days, now when you talk to CEOs, you can have conversations around, like, do you have an instructional designer on staff or on consultation? And okay, you do, great. And let me see your product, let me try it out. And then you can see for yourself whether it's designed well. And if it's not, you can give people advice, and companies are eager to take it because they want to get into the education market. So really helpful. Lastly, I want to talk about collaboration before I take any questions. I've been talking with a lot of schools all over the world, and I've met some brilliant educators, mostly online, and many schools are developing some applications internally. I think of University of Michigan as an example, and Jeremy Nielsen's work. And some of these schools are developing applications and making them available as open source applications for other schools, which I really love. And I would encourage other schools to do the same. I'm really disappointed, truly heartbroken when a school develops something that's really cool and then they commercialize it. As you know, XR, be it virtual, mixed, or augmented reality, is fairly expensive. Most colleges and universities are publicly funded and don't have the money for purchasing those things, and you have to look seriously at what's the return on investment that we're getting here. Does it hit on a large number of learning objectives and that makes it worthwhile, or does it hit on some learning objectives that would otherwise be almost impossible or dangerous or expensive, or etc. But if schools can develop applications and make them open source, that really helps us all. And I've had this conversation with a number of universities, and I'm currently speaking with a company who's looking to create kind of a storefront, like a Steam type storefront, but a separate area that'll be specific for open source developed applications from schools and companies. So again, just want to plant that seed with you and let you think about that. The other thing that's valuable about collaborating is sharing best practices. For the last 3 years, I've been writing up little bits and pieces about best practices around, for example, XR and hygiene, and building VR labs, and running large events, small events, etc. And I'm happy to share those with anyone who wants them. We're going to be publishing some in the near future. I'm hoping through checks, actually, in the not too distant future, in iLRN to start to peer review some of the work I've done and work that's been done by others, so that we can make it available through the Immersive Learning Research Network website and available to anyone. And the other thing, I'm sort of going backwards here, but the last thing I wanted to mention about collaboration is doing multi-center research. We're just wrapping up a 2-year research study on the efficacy of virtual reality anatomy for learning. And I think there's lots of opportunities for schools to collaborate with one another to do research. And there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in the area of research and immersive learning. So I think there's lots of opportunities. So just to summarize, and then I'll take any questions. I think, as I mentioned, one of the best ways to learn about immersive learning, like any other technology, is through just simple conversations and networking with other educators. So if you're not already doing this on your own, I would strongly encourage people to create their own peer learning networks, either through social media or otherwise. I'll give you an example. We piloted patient simulation for nursing, And what I did was just on a single Google sheet or Google Doc, I collected the names of nursing faculty, schools, and the programs, the VR programs they're using, so that I have this contact list and I can reach out to any one of them and ask some questions about the particular software that they're using, the strengths and shortcomings, and any challenges that they've experienced with those. So peer learning networks are really, truly have been invaluable for me, and I encourage you. My view is I'll share everything I know with anyone who asks. I don't do any consulting for money, although I might once I retire, but for now, everything I know is yours to have, if you think it's worthwhile. Secondly, I would say, a lot of schools, teachers, I find are reluctant to get into this a new technology space because of the fear that something newer will come along, something better will come along. Let's just wait and see what everyone else does. And I think there's a real danger of suffering from paralysis from analysis, as they say. And I think it's important to try XR on a small scale, on a pilot basis, to learn from it and see what its strengths and shortcomings are pedagogically, and to see what ends up sticking. I haven't even talked about this, but there are a billion barriers to adoption of XR, and we can talk about that. And there are many reasons why XR is not going to work for all, or VR in particular is not going to work for all students, but the technology is evolving. And I think getting in the early days is valuable. And to do that, you just have to make it happen. Again, advocating, right now, most of the people I have conversations with at companies are CEOs, but it's just a matter of a year or two before I'm no longer talking with CEOs and talking with salespeople. And while salespeople are nice, they're not helpful in terms of price negotiation and having conversations around pedagogy and instructional design and things of those natures. And lastly, again, you're all from the education world here, either corporate or academic, and I would strongly encourage collaboration and sharing of resources and experiences. So with that, I'll say thank you, and I want to thank the Virbela audience and the YouTube audience, and let me see if we can take some questions. I saw someone clapping, which means you heard me, which I'm grateful for. Funny, I can't hear anyone clapping. Okay, I can now. A little quiet there for a second.
Thank you, Rob. That was wonderful. Fantastic. So many things, so many connections, really on point, and inspirational.
Thank you.
Do we have any questions? I'm looking in the chat. I see a thumbs up. I see some clapping. Looking real good. Yeah.
You guys look really good too, by the way. I love the clothes, the hair.
Right, these new avatars really make it work. Yeah. I have a number of kind of questions, like, Rob, how would you recommend that other colleges and faculty members, industry people, that you talk about the networking thing, and so I really want to give a plug for the Immersive Learning Research Network as as one place where these things can happen, but just from your perspective, like, not to be self-referential there, what are you seeing out there while you're working with these different higher education and business, and you've just got such a great perspective, like, and you named a number of the trends. Just like, do you have any like strategic advice for people out in the woods there?
Yeah, it's a really broad question, and I have talked to a lot of educators and corporations, and I think, first and foremost, you have to make a plan that you think is based on a really compelling application and just launch it and make it happen on a pilot basis, which to me is, fiscally responsible, a fiscally responsible approach. It was interesting. Central Connecticut State University got some money from the state to build an XR lab. Well, they got some money from the state, and somebody in senior leadership team decided to build an XR lab, and they did. It's a beautiful XR lab, state of the art, and they hired a guy by the name of Chris Bickle to manage it. And Chris and I were connected on LinkedIn. And Chris called around. He used his, the power of networking. He called around to different people and scheduled meetings with them. And one of them was with me. And he said, "Rob, what do you think I should do with this lab?" And I asked if he had a nursing program, and he said yes. And I said I would talk to your nursing faculty, see if they're interested in patient simulation. So we did, and they were the first program to come through the lab. And I had the good fortune of actually being there on the first day that nursing students were there, and their reactions were incredible. They were in awe of the experience. And so, that would be, one example of good use case for XR. One, because nursing programs around the globe are having difficulty getting students placed in clinical, and lab is expensive. And if you can supplement or even replace a clinical day or a lab day with an XR experience, then you're ahead of the game. The interesting thing from the students' perspective, the students love XR because they feel they're in a hospital. They have this sense of presence. They have this contextual experience where they're in a hospital room. They're having a conversation with a patient, and maybe the patient's wife or patient's husband, allaying their fears, and they're interacting with the patient. And very quickly, they experience this suspended disbelief, and they can do things with their hands. And so that agency is very powerful. And even though the tactile fidelity virtual reality is not there, they can still, assess vital signs and carry out procedures and learn to do them in the proper sequence. The faculty member at our school who was part of that pilot loved VR because the analytics provided her with all the information she needed about what the students did, the sequence in which they did it, did they get the right drug, the right dose, the right time, the right route, etc. And she could focus on the students' soft skills. Did they exhibit empathy and compassion? And, did they say things that were appropriate and that allayed fears? And that context and that agency is so valuable. You learn the tactile skills in a lab, and of course in the clinical setting as well, but learning the sequence of it and remembering the sequence of it, and the variety of types of scenarios you can experience. There's so many solid, good use cases of VR, but unlike this stage and this amphitheater, you want to do VR that, I mentioned the dice principle earlier, but things that are, give you a sense of presence, provide context of learning, and give you agency. Those are the critical factors, and there are so many use cases. And I think VR and MR and AR is just going to eventually just sort of fit in certain areas particularly well and not so well in other areas. I don't know if that answers your question, but that was a long answer for a short question.
100%. That was so good. Yeah. I mean, you really covered that broad question from so many different angles. I always appreciate that about you. And not only do you kind of cover those things, but you bring them down to you concretize it and make it in a variety of different real good examples about what things people can do right now. So that was fantastic. Thank you. Any other questions?
Rob, I have a question and a comment.
Okay.
And I am wondering when your book is coming out, because we need it in the world.
Still a work in progress, but yeah, I'm hoping to get some time this summer to really buckle down on it.
That would be wonderful, because listening to your talk, I think I speak on behalf of everyone here and everyone who's listening, that it is really inspiring. And I'm looking at the slide right now for the future of XR in education. We need more networking, making it happen, advocating collaboration. And So from my perspective, what I see is you are a leader in so many different areas, and you've overcome all the obstacles that prevent people from using XR in education. And that includes funding, administration, headsets, just numerous challenges that are obstacles for people to experiment and to play and to start using the tools. Like, I appreciate what you said at the beginning of your talk, that now is the time, like this is the time, and we need to start learning and seeing how we can use these tools in different education settings and how it can improve practice and solve problems of learning that we've been struggling with. But the barriers are actually quite high, and you make it sound easy. And so that's what's so inspiring about any talk I've ever listened to, is that you just sort of like pave the way, but you are not naive. Like, you are dealing with all of the challenges, and you're just very resilient at finding solutions and moving forward and getting so many innovative projects off the ground. So I have really enjoyed your talk, and we really do need your book out in the world, because we need that support and encouragement. And just, you know, like I said, like how you dealt with obstacles and have had so many different projects and so many different stories that have led to success. And yeah, I just thank you for the work you've done, and you're just very inspiring.
Thanks so much, Paula. Very grateful.
I'd underscore that 100%, Rob. I've been an admirer of yours for quite some time, and really proud that you've been with us for the Champions in Higher Education and XR. I feel privileged to have these, you know, independent private conversations with you on a regular basis. It's awesome.
Yeah, changing careers at my age has been was fun, and I'm trying to convince my 21-year-old daughter that I'm not your average boomer. But
right,
I should bring her to these events so she can hear from you guys.
Would you? I know how that is too with my children. Yeah, no, that's great. There's so much going on right now. We're sort of at this inflection point, it feels like. Well, I mean, we're in this business, we've sort of been at these inflection points over and over. You look at that Gartner's hype cycle, and it sometimes is exhausting being out here on the front edge of change. But at the same time, that's where the actual skills are being developed, you know?
Right. And, you know, I mean, I can't say enough about peer learning networks. There's so many people in this area doing some truly brilliant things. You know, for example, I in virtual reality, I met a guy by the name of Tim Kobold, who is an emergency room physician. And he was using an application on resuscitation that used voice recognition and artificial intelligence. And based on that conversation, we experimented with it with our advanced care paramedic program. He also did something really interesting. He would take his ER residents and he would put them into VR meditation for 5 minutes around the 10-hour mark of their shift. And he had the students, or not the students, but the residents fill out a Oxford University psychometric stress sort of evaluation or form survey pre and post. And I think he's planning on publishing this. He found that his ER docs were felt completely refreshed after just 5 minutes of virtual reality. And based on that, I had a conversation with our mental health and well-being group, and they had their first mindfulness session in virtual reality a few weeks ago, and it was hugely successful. People just absolutely loved it. And now we've been connecting with Caitlin Krause, who most of you know, who is the mindfulness guru. And she is so wonderful and so willing to help people. And I think, you know, we're going to see some amazing things in the area of mental health for students and faculty.
Fully agree.
High stress positions, rather.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some really, really neat things on the horizon for, I think, really connecting to that emotional machine that has been talked about, that VR
Right.
has that potential to be. We're really on the doorstep of just starting to realize some of that vast potential. Yeah. You can see
Yeah, it's
plenty. Anyway,
incredible.
sorry.
I don't know what the rest of you, but I've, been into VR places where I just sat there by myself and felt completely relaxed because the space was beautiful and it was calm,
Right?
and
Yeah.
it's an escape.
I'll hop into a boat here on the Verbella campus while we're,
Right.
managing the campus, and I'll go to the little cove, find a little cove, like nobody can find me, but I kind of squirrel into it and get back, and I put on some music, but I can hear
Yeah.
in world and I can DM people in world, but it's been a really neat thing to have that sort of as a third space. This
Yeah.
campus is so beautiful now. Like the first one was fine, but working in it for hours on end, or just having it in the background sometimes when you're working on other, like it wasn't the same as this new one. This new campus, I seriously have I have sort of connectedness to the space as a designed thing that is way, I don't know, it's just better. Sorry about that. I had to wax about. It's just interesting that these patterns of use that get developed. So I was expressing my own.
Yeah, and I think we can't understate the fact that being in immersive environments leaves indelible memories. One of my more recent ones was we tried a firefighting simulation at the college, and in about the first 15 seconds of trying to put out the fire on a transformer up on a pole, I died.
Uh-huh.
And I wasn't very happy about dying. And I suddenly realized very quickly in retrospect, it's probably not a good idea to put water on this electrical transformer as electricity travels back through the water to me. And I came out of the headset. There was a group of firefighters, fire chiefs, and deputy chiefs, and frontline firefighters, and someone from the Ontario Deputy Fire Marshal's office there. And I took my headset off and looked at them and said, "Really, is this what you do? You just kill your newbies in the first, 10 seconds?" Nice of them to give me that particular scenario, but I'll never forget the experience. And
that would be powerful feedback.
Not. I won't be a firefighter ever, but that's something I will not forget. Oh, someone I think has a question.
Incredible.
Yes. Kelly Fay. And
hi, Kelly.
I'm so thrilled to finally meet you because I'm in Canada too. And
yay.
Not that there's anything wrong with anyone else in the world, but it's always nice to have someone from home. And I have a lot of admiration from afar. And thank you so much for your talk. And I just want to dovetail on what you're saying is that, and this is why VR is so powerful, because these really dangerous training scenarios, like, thank goodness you learned that in VR. And this is the thing, is that that lesson could have been learned in real life and that person could have died, so that's why I just think, that the power and the potential of learning in VR is just immense. So anyways, thank you so very much.
Yeah, and could be traumatic in a sense, right? Like now, I was a paramedic for 35 years, so killing myself trying to put out a transformer fire, left me a little traumatized, but I'm okay. But I worry a little bit about like a new student who does that for the first time. So, but the amazing thing about virtual reality, for example, is that the newer, more advanced headsets come with biometrics, and where you can actually quantify a student's stress level and begin to scaffold their learning in such a way that you take them from sort of low acuity, low danger levels to higher levels and build in stress resilience to their education, which is something almost impossible to do now, but you can do that with biometrics in XR. That's exciting to me. Awkward
I'll
pause.
just in with a quick comment and say I'm excited, but also very concerned around biometrics and
Yes.
the data, because it is very unclear, like how the data is being collected, stored, used, and when you try to read anything in terms of privacy agreements, it's very challenging to read. So it's just a concern I have that I hope we can get sorted out for the future, because that data is incredibly powerful to tell many things about a person that are not necessarily needed for learning. So
Right.
they can be helpful. And then at the same time, they can be harmful if the data is not used in careful ways.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It is scary. And, in addition to being there, so many barriers to adoption, there's so many risks, biometrics being probably arguably the biggest one, not just from a, use of your biometrics to target advertising, but also, using your biometrics to diagnose things that no one should have the business of diagnosing than your family physician, your specialist. Sound of your voice or the pulse or other biometric features. So I agree 100%. It is.
It goes back to your
frightening.
very first slide. No educational technology has an easy time. There are affordances and constraints, and that juxtaposition is always there. Like there are always tensions, and so I appreciate also your first slide, because sometimes we just assume that, there should be all the affordances and roses, and it's never that way with ed tech. Like it is always already about the tensions, and we need to be aware of the affordances and constraints. So thanks.
Yeah,
it's a great way to open your talk.
And I'm grateful, that being an academic institute where you can leverage your IT department for security and safety and privacy, you can leverage your equity, diversity, and inclusivity group to ensure that, the activities that you're doing sort of address those concerns, and our accessibility team that can address those terms. And of course, as I mentioned, we're always learning things. One of the things I learned recently, we had a really big 3D painting event with, where we had about 160 grade 8 students come through 30 VR stations to learn 3D painting. And we had a student I was unaware of, the teacher didn't tell me, a student who was on the spectrum, and he tried 3D painting and absolutely loved it. But when he had to take the headset off, he was quite upset. And I was talking to one of our accessibility experts at the college, and we were talking about management of headsets. And she said, if you can get your mobile device manager system to give a countdown, for someone who's on the autism spectrum, give a countdown in the experience. So let's say you're 10 minutes in 3D painting, and then it gives you a warning at 3 minutes, 2 minutes, and 1 minute. Because if they're prepared for that, they're more likely to ease out of that experience from the fantasy world to the real world without too much difficulty.
Well, I'm going to use that as a segue. We're 1 minute from the top of the hour where I'm supposed to grab the mic from you there, Rob.
Okay.
Thank you so much, everybody. Give Rob Theriault a huge, big hand. That was so great. Thank you so much for really situating the landscape for higher education and all of us, really, for the future. That was fantastic.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for keynoting, brother.
I'd like to end this presentation with a little dance.
Okay, let's go. Rob Theriault, everyone.
Can't make these moves in real life, but
That's right. Me either.